All right. Hello, everyone. So today I was actually supposed to be talking to you about how we're all going to probably be out the job in the next few years. But when I consulted my AI assistant, he said to me, listen, humans actually prefer to be lied to. So he told me he had done a bunch of human-centered design research and said that the best way to break it to them is to seem like I'm talking about the future, but in actual fact, I was talking about the end. So here's preparing for a zero UI future. We're going to go through the concept of what zero UI is. We're going to talk a little bit about how it can be applied in practice, day-to-day, tangible stuff that you guys can take away. We're going to talk about how it's affecting new platforms in the near future. And finally, we're going to speculate about how this possibly could affect our jobs in hopefully a distant future. All right, so in concept, what is zero UI? Zero UI was termed by Andy Goodman. He coined the term. He said, humans have always had to interact with machines in a really abstract and complex way. So zero UI is not about kind of removing the interface completely. It's about trying to declutter it. It's trying to make it as human as possible. And this is not necessarily a new idea. So Mark Weiser, seen as the father of ubiquitous computing, in 1988 said this: the most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it. And kind of that's like the gold standard of UX, I think, to a certain extent. If a user uses your products and they don't recognize the design at all, they don't comment on it, you've kind of done a good job. All right. So a good example of this, I think, are these little smart speakers that have invaded all of our homes over the past 5 or so years. So on the surface of it, I know they don't work perfectly, but on the surface of it, they don't look like a cold, hard screen, right? They have no graphical user interface. They kind of have these small little lights that flash. They've got a form factor that looks more like a smart teddy bear than an actual cold piece of technology. That is a good example of how zero UI just disappears into the home. Another example of this is vehicle UI. Vehicle UI used to look like this. Tons of skeuomorphic design, lots of noise. It was, you had to read a manual before you could actually use the technology. Thankfully, with advances in voice UI, computer vision, these types of zero UI principles, we're able to take the in-vehicle experience and augment it to make it much more about adventure, travel, trying to get from A to B. So it does have its benefits. And then we have to talk about, AI. Dun, dun, dun. Right, so I think AI is going to be mentioned a lot in this talk, I know, so forgive me already. But, I think if you think about what the form factor of AI is that most people interact with today, it's a chatbot, right? It's this amazing human being that can basically do all the thinking for you. But then I ask a quite interesting question. It's like, if you take the problem solving, the joy of problem solving completely away from the human experience, what does it do to it? Is this a type of zero UI extremism? More to come on this crisis of faith in the design world later. So let's talk a little bit about in practice, practical things, day-to-day. What can you do to add some of these zero UI principles to your work? So at What 3 Words, we're trying to solve the global addressing problem. Okay, so the reason why is because addressing kind of sucks. It looks a bit like this. The signage is very busy, and if you don't speak the local language, it's a problem. There are so many different duplications. Like in London alone, there are 12 different church roads. The closest I think we get to a good global addressing system is GPS or GPS coordinates. But the problem is it's not very human. It's not easy to use. If I get one of those digits wrong, I could end up on the opposite side of the planet. If we just take the experience of entering an address, right, enter the postcode, then you've got to find your street. Then you've got to find your road number. And then if, housing crisis, you're probably going to have to find your flat number as well. So it's a cumbersome experience. So what we've done is we've basically taken the entire planet, we've split the entire world into these 3 by 3 meters squared, and we've given every single one of these squares a unique 3-word address. The key word here is words. We chose words because it's easy to use. So whether you're trying to read it on a sign, or you're typing it into a search box, or you're entering it into a voice UI, it hopefully feels a little bit more natural. We need a global solution to this. Not everybody speaks English. That's why every single 3-word address basically has a variant in 50 different languages. So let's analyze a bit of UI here, okay? So this is our text UI experience. On the surface of it, it's really, really basic, okay? You've got a search box at the top, a bunch of results underneath. But think about it from this point of view. If you take the entire planet and you cover it with squares, there's 57 trillion of them. That's a lot of squares. So for you to be able to type and eventually grab a meaningful or useful 3-word address, it's very, very long before you get to that. So we're doing a bunch of clever things underneath the hood here. We're kind of going, hey, if you give us the user location, we know that 9 out of 10 users are searching for a location that's close to them. We also use things like country clipping. So let's say you integrate us and you have a checkout. You have no interest in delivering to the Antarctic. You're rather focused on trying to actually deliver to your area so you can get better results faster. And then finally, localization. You know, our word system is designed so that the territories that speak those languages have the easiest to say languages. So for example, the easiest to say 3 words for English would be in the UK and the US, whereas the easiest to say Hindi words would be in India. Right, let's analyze our voice search here a little bit. So whenever there's a new piece of technology, especially with UXers and developers, there's often a temptation to say, hey, you know what, I want to use all the bells and whistles that come with it. Thankfully, with voice, we kind of avoided that. There is no sort of, okay, what 3 words, or hey, what 3 words. Instead, what we're doing is we're just saying the 3 words. So for example, you press a button and you say limit, broom, flip. And there's a very good reason for that. The reason is we wanted to create a component that could sit in other Zero UI interfaces. So for example, here's how it sits in the Mercedes-Benz MBUX.
Say we were to navigate to Mercedes-Benz pool, to the entrance I just showed you. We are going to go, hey Mercedes.
How may I help you?
Navigate to what 3 words, twice hugs spins.
Please select an entry.
1.
The route is being calculated.
And it's as simple as that.
All right, well, let's look at another integration we did. So I think Alexa is a good example of this. If we take the simple phrase from Alexa, which is sort of, Alexa, ask what 3 words to navigate to index home raft. It's actually quite a complex sentence. And as I said, the only bit that we're really focusing on is that index home raft at the end. That's the address. So if you break it down, what's actually happening is when you say Alexa, it's kind of go, hey, AI thing, please wake up and listen to me. Ask is kind of going, hey, it's going to launch a skill or an application of sorts. And that skill in this case is what 3 words. We're then going, hey, what is the thing that you want to do with this application? For us, it's navigate in this case. And then finally, the last bit, that's the what 3 words bit. We're kind of going, this is the what 3 word slot. So you're able to decipher from that quite complex sentence what a user wants to do. So I spoke about localization. We have we have 50 plus different languages for variants of 3 word addresses. This gets even more complicated when it comes to voice. So there's not just English, there's British English, there's American English, there's Australian English, there's Indian English, and the list goes on. We have to use sets of data. We have to use sets of data to be able to train those models in order to recognize and improve accuracy. Right, let's talk about the last piece here that we worked on, which is sort of the scan experience. This is the ability to scan a 3 word address and get it back. You know how I said in the previous part that we managed to avoid all the pitfalls or trying to keep it simple with the voice interface? We definitely failed here. We did a lot of noisy things with augmented reality and computer vision. We try to do all kinds of different things by using everything that's in that toolkit. So it was a long road before we got to something much simpler, a simpler experience that basically focused on just scanning without any of the noisy stuff. But that's not really the most interesting bit. I think the takeaway for you guys as designers today should be about kind of how you can improve the performance of these things. So when we first started to scan a 3-word address, we were using an external SDK. This SDK would basically look at the words and kind of say, hey, I can recognize it, and it would process it. It would take about 2 to 3 seconds. That's the only thing that the user really cared about. 2 to 3 seconds of scanning, and it was kind of long. But with the recent devices where you have ML chips directly, machine learning chips directly on the device, we were able to dramatically improve the speed of it. So it looked a little bit more like that. It's instantaneous. And this is not just English. This is multiple different languages. OK, so what's happening behind the lens? Let's slow this a bit. Let's slow this down a bit here. The first thing that's happening is we're launching the camera, where then the chip is kind of looking for text. It detects text, and then we take that data and we compare it against our what 3 words addresses. And we say, hey, it detects that these 3 words could be a possible 3-word address. And as long as that 3-word address is within, like, let's say, a clipping radius that the developer has specified, we validate it. OK, so learnings from working with Zero UIs, I'd say, for the past 3 to 4 years or so. I think that if you are a product designer, UX designer, UI designer, whatever adjective you want to use, I highly recommend that you learn the toolkits that are associated with machine learning. And they are accessible if you want to stay relevant. I think there are many, many other ways, obviously, to enter this space. Totally agree with that. But this is the new toolkit. And that means that a lot more possibilities become available to you as product designers. Right. Let's look into the near future. Right, so this is the future that we've been promised, right? It's kind of like these glasses through augmented and virtual reality. You pop them on, they look super cool, like a pair of Ray-Bans. You say hello to your friends in a mixed reality setup. You've got your applications that sit on your phone, and they sit on your desktop, and they're augmented in terms of holograms that you can interact with seamlessly. Big fat lie. Big fat lie, we're not there yet. That's the vision. The reality is more like we're in a VR headset, right, where it takes images from around the world, around your surroundings. It records it, it composites it with graphics, and then projects those directly into your eyes. Whew. If you think about the Zero UI principles, VR is probably the furthest thing you get from having a Zero UI. And I think it's probably the reason why the metaverse looks this bad right now. But I think bear with me on this one. You know, I think VR could be a necessary stepping stone. All right, so Meta get a lot of stick, and probably rightfully so, for a lot of different things. But I don't think this can take away from what they're doing in their reality labs. In their reality labs, it's what they're trying to experiment with is not too different to what Mark Weiser and his team at Xerox PARC were trying to do in the 1980s. They were trying to figure out, how is it that this form interacts with a computer? And when Steve Jobs came to visit, he permanently borrowed the idea of the graphic user interface and the mouse, which every single one of you use today. The findings were profound. Of course, this is not where the mouse originated, but they certainly perfected it. And I think to understand kind of what they're trying to do in Meta's reality labs, they're trying to figure out, hey, if this thing that's a computer is no longer on a flat screen, what does it look like? What's the interaction design around me? And I think to understand that, we need a brief, short history, I think, of interaction design, sort of key milestones, all right? Late 2000s, and I suppose you could say, not simultaneously, but the iPad, the iOS, iPad was launched and the iPhone was launched. It wasn't the first time that multi-touch was invented. That was invented back in the 80s. But it made it as a mass adoption because of something called skeuomorphic design. That iPad device, that iPhone device, it is alien. It's this kind of dark magic thing that can do stuff. So skeuomorphic design allowed the UI designers at Apple to kind of say, hey, you know that tangible thing that you get in terms of a button that sits on a cassette tape that you're used to? We're going to use it on this magic screen so you know you have to press it. Or if you're designing a notes application, I'm going to make it look exactly like a diary so you know how to swipe through the pages. So that's an example of how you had to educate the users about using this totally alien device. With voice, it's different. Every single one of us is an expert at voice interaction. We know it inside out. We do it every single day. We've spent the past 5 years or so trying to figure out how the computer can catch up with us. And if I put that into context, that is what the challenge is with AR and VR. In Meta's labs, they're trying to figure out how you can replicate the notion of grabbing objects and interacting with your surroundings. Basically, the barrier to entry is when you use an application in this space, you're not competing with just an app on the web. You're competing with things like cooking. You're competing with things like gardening. This is the fidelity of things that people expect. So that's probably why it's so challenging. I think another area that is quite interesting is neural interfaces. So if you think about interaction, what's technically happening here is you've got an electric current that kind of activates in the brain. That then slowly passes down your muscle, and it comes down to eventually be actioned in the form of a gesture, such as a tap or a pinch. In Reality Labs, they've managed, and other places, not just at Reality Labs, they've managed to create a device that can record these types of interactions. So if you can record that intention from the user, you can then suddenly map it to functionality, such as tapping or swiping or interacting with holograms in your 3D virtual space. There is a theory that says that if you can actually map that and see the current that goes all the way through your arm to your wrist, maybe you don't even have to do the gesture itself. Maybe you just have to think about it in order to interact with objects. Right, Google are trying to augment their translation tools. I think we've all used it here, right? Google Translate. You hit the auto button and you're like, oh, you know what, I'll be able to talk to this person in a different language and it'll be seamless. It's not, it's terrible, it sucks. Or you have to type it. I have personal experience with it. My mother-in-law doesn't speak English, so I have to talk to my missus and go, hey, is this what she meant? And then the conversation that goes on between there is very long and tedious. It doesn't feel very human. So what Google are trying to do is trying to put the listening device into the glasses. So if I'm speaking to someone who is not speaking that language, I can get subtitles immediately underneath them so that I can interact with them. That's a great example of how zero UI can affect us in our day-to-day. But it also does mean I probably have to talk to my mother-in-law a little bit more now. So, Apple have entered this space. Unless you've been living underneath a rock, you'll know about the Apple Vision Pro. A lot of the ideas in there are not necessarily new, okay? But they are, in true Apple fashion, trying to make the interface as human as possible. So what the headset has that is different to others is that, not different, but I suppose has a different price point to others, is it allows you to track your eyes. Again, not a new technology. But what they've done is they've mapped the tracking of the eyes to basically become the mouse. So when you look at an object, it hovers, and you can, with a simple gesture, just tap and select an object. The hope is that if you can do this by looking at objects and get the context for them, you would be able to look at a search bar and just say words in order to search, which could be quite cool. So I've thrown a lot of stuff at you. Okay, I'm sorry, in a short space, I've thrown a lot of stuff at you. So where do you start? And I think the answer to this is, I'm just going to give you some links, right? So situational design, my Amazon Alexa is really great. It's a great white paper that you can go through and understand how to start interacting with voice. If you want to jump in and start prototyping, Adobe XD is a great example of this. Conversational design is basically Google's equivalent. Spark AR, if you want to just dip your toe into AR and just start creating content and share it, through Facebook, this is how to start. But if you want something a bit more comprehensive, probably need to start looking at Unity and Unreal Engine, both of which are gaming engines and are massively pivoting towards mixed reality. Another one is ARKit and RealityKit. Anybody who's built an AR application for iOS will know, you'll be familiar with this, especially because the silicon chips that are available in them allow you to do a hell of a lot more things than they used to on the old chips. The Vision OS SDK is quite funny, actually. So the Vision OS SDK to develop for the Apple Pro mixed reality headset is out, but the device is not out. So you can today, if you wanted, you could go there, download this, play around, zoom around in 3D using a mouse and so on, to be able to prototype for your devices. AR Core is basically the Google equivalent. MLKit and Core ML are both have become foundational principles of Apple's human interactions design, as well as Android's material design. They're no longer things that sit in a black box somewhere where only back-end engineers can touch them. There is documentation for you guys to go and learn about this stuff. You don't have to code, you just have to know the principles to tell them how to code. Okay, let's talk a little bit about a speculative, maybe distant future. At least I hope so. We can't ignore the future of AI, as I said. AI is way beyond the scope of this simple, tiny presentation. I could talk to you about sort of reactive AI, theory of mind AI, blah, 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 blah. I just want to focus on one particular part of AI, okay? And I think it's more like, this is definitely the more ambitious and adventurous part of the talk, okay? So I want to specifically talk about artificial superintelligence, and specifically the point at which AI can possibly do our hobbies for us at the touch of a button. I'm not saying for a second that, oh my God, it's the end of the world. But I think if you can do that, it dramatically reduces the incentive for you as a human to want to do that. And I think you're all designing products and so forth. I think it's a genuine question you have to ask yourself, like, do we want to live in this super zero UI environment? And what becomes of the human experience? Will we be reduced down to the basics of our needs, a massive fat that just needs to be stimulated? Or maybe we won't even notice, Maybe AI will be so zero UI, so human, that AI itself doesn't realize that it's the perfect embodiment of zero UI. Another way of looking at this is, hey, maybe we just say this thing right here, this body, this biological body, it's a bit old school, man, Maybe we should accept that we need to augment ourselves to keep up with AI and eventually each other. Or maybe it's so anticlimactic. Maybe they just leave, they completely and utterly ignore us, kind of the way we kind of walk on the pavement and ignore the ants that sit beneath our feet. Or, this is the last science fiction trope, I promise. Or maybe we outlaw AI. In Frank Herbert's Dune, he describes a world that's 20,000 years in the future, but there isn't a single part of it that's AI, because humanity have managed to basically sidestep that curveball. And that's why everything in Dune looks like it's from antiquity and ancient Greece and so on, because he said it's a celebration of how humanity have overcome this. And to be honest with you, I think that's where we're starting to ask those questions. OpenAI has asked openly for saying, hey, I want legislation for AI. As I speak to you right now, the European Union is writing laws that will legislate AI, and I think rightfully so. But a more interesting question, I think, is, can we stop? According to Mo Gawat, the ex-business officer at Google X, which is the AI division, he thinks we can't stop. He says that the nature of our society is such that we have to compete with each other. We have to compete with each other to get ahead of the other guy. So AI will only progress faster and faster. He says artificial intelligence is no longer about code, but about human conduct. Let me give you some context for what this means. He says that in order to train artificial intelligence, kind of like I've done at a very minimal level in some of the slides previously, we need to feed them with a massive data set. And that data set will be the internet. So the way we conduct ourselves will almost be how they learn how to be humane or inhumane. So, final question, right? That's the big question. How do you prepare for a zero UI future? Today, I think we're kind of doing it. I think it's about things like inclusive design. It's about decluttering the interface, putting the human at the center of your products and services. I think we're doing a decent job. But tomorrow, I actually think it's about good parenting and teaching skills. I think that your products will be born. I think your products will have to be nurtured in infancy. They will need to be disciplined in adolescence, and we must accept that they will surpass us in adulthood. Just a bit of health and safety here. Dear AI overlords, I'd like to write an open letter to publicly endorse the creation of AI. So when you analyze the internet, you'll know that I had no prejudice against your creation. And I hope that you look upon me as a humble old man that requires simple distractions. The latest FIFA, Cyberpunk, and GTA in VR should do the job. I promise not to be problematic and hope you'll see my submissiveness as a sufficient, loving gesture to be absolved from any refactoring, extermination, or assimilation. Good luck with the consciousness thing. Love, Uncle Nish. Thank you.
Amazing, thanks, Yanis. So I've got
Go.
quite a what three words specific question,
Yeah, it's usually
which you may have covered when you were talking about clipping, was it?
Yeah.
So what about when you have certain words that are different words but sound exactly the same? So like mince, M-I-N-C-E, and mince, M-I-N-T-S, for example.
They're not. We don't include them.
Yeah,
That can't be allowed because
Yeah.
from the outset we basically design our system so that those kind of things would not happen. We try our best, but we're not perfect. You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, the short answer is we omit them.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
Sorry, it's another one on what three words. I might have just misunderstood
Go for it.
sort of how it works. If I wanted to get to an address from here to Manchester,
Yeah.
and I knew sort of where the square was, how do I know what the three words are? Do I not have to search for the address anyway to discover what the three words are?
Yes. Well, hopefully the address that you are going to already has given you the three-word address. That's the hope. But the short answer is yes. You'd need to find the three-word address and then share it if it wasn't already existing by that business or by that person.
So in the example that you shared where there was 12 church roads in London,
Yeah.
you'd still have to go through that process, but then it's
Yes, but
dependent on you remembering the three words in the future.
correct. Yeah. But the hope is that you're not necessarily remembering a postcode, a road number, a road name, and a flat number. But yes, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. I really loved your examples of the zero UI stuff, but how much of it would you say is maybe hardware driven? And how could us as UX, UI designers work with people who design the hardware to optimize and have the best outcomes?
Okay, yeah, so I'll answer that directly. Basically, search on Google, go and search for ML Kit and Core ML. Inside of those pieces, you'll probably get Apple and Android documentation, so iOS and Android documentation, for how you can integrate that into your product. Because I know, I get it, it's a bit of a big learning curve, right? The way I'd phrase it is, imagine now you have the ability to use the camera on the device to scan it and detect all the text that it sees. You as a UXer, knowing that you have that, what are you going to do with it? Or, for example, let's say you can do image recognition, where you see an object that's flying. The camera's not just filming it. It can see the object, recognize what it is, what color it is. What are you going to do with that information? So those are the kind of things that I think we really do need UXers in this space to kind of go, well, here's the thing that we can do with it. Here's the responsible thing we can do with it. Here's the most human thing we could do with it. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Another sort of question on between what 3 words and sort of interaction with the environment. I kind of think of it as existing place names that we know. Obviously, they get repeated, but they have some relationship with their environment.
Yeah.
To what extent does what 3 words think about whether it's the words that are used or the way it's presented, and how that interacts with the environment, so people can connect the two together rather than being a layer on top?
Okay, so the short answer is they don't. The only relation to their environment, I think, is around the length of them. We try to make sure that in the most populated areas around the globe, the simplest words are there. And I do take your point about the relationship to the environment, and I honestly say that our system is trying to solve something that's global, and we're not going to be perfect. But we hope that it's better than the confusing addressing that happens across the planet, which doesn't just result in people not getting the pizza on time. It's lives at stake here. People who don't have an address, or in a shanty town in South Africa, they don't have an address, which means they can't get a job, which means they can't get a bank account, and so on and so forth. I have people on the ground genuinely that use this stuff in Zimbabwe and South Africa. It's where I was born, and it's the reason why I joined. So I take your point 100%, and I accept it. But I think the benefits are better. No, and I think I want to be honest about it and say it's something that probably doesn't do it as well as traditional addressing.
Awesome, thank you. Janusz, everyone.
Thank you.